What is up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. And today we're going to be taking a look at a classic hand from high-stakes poker play between Gus Hansen and Andreas Hoivold.
Stradalon, what's going on in this game, man?
There's no need with these antes.
I mean, there was no one straddle since I came.
Plenty of.
Phil Hellmuth was the only one who straddled.
Yeah,
It's true.
he did straddle.
He's steaming. He lost
shoved
it
that
70 left.
1600 off just like nothing.
Did you? Who made it 3? Made 33.
Oh, you did? Oh, I'm the big blind.
Ellie trying to get the straddle on. Didn't work this hand. Dwan raised to 3,300 with Queen 4 of spades. A lot of players like suited connectors. Dwan likes suited long distance cards. 10-7 for Daniel. I once heard him say that's his favorite hand. And Gus is priced in with a 6-3 offsuit.
Now, following in the footsteps of many of our past high-stakes poker hands, we're going to start off with some quite liberal pre-flop action with many players making mistakes. And we're going to kick it off with Tom Dwan opening under the gun with Queen 4 suited. Now, I could do the whole thing where I say what's wrong with it, and then you guys comment, and then someone talks about poker. But let's just leave it at don't open Queen 4 suited under the gun. Action then folds to Eli Elezra in the hijack with 8-5 suited, who decides to go for the flat. Again, a bit too loose. If you want to play this hand, I'd like to see him coming in for a raise. Otherwise, just let it go. You have a couple players behind you in position. The blind's still left to act. You're not exactly in a great spot to call this $3,300 open. You don't have to play hands just because they're suited and vaguely connected. Anyway, he does decide to go for the flat, and then the action ends up on Andreas Hoivold with ace-queen off on the button with a somewhat serious decision. Now, I think I do like, against most opponents, the decision to flat here, because if you 3-bet and you face a 4-bet, you're not really totally sure where you're at or what you should do. But when you're playing with these loose maniacs, I think you have to 3-bet for value. I mean, if Dwan might be opening hands like Queen 4 suited under the gun, you are miles ahead with hands like Ace-Queen, and thinning the field out seems like a pretty good proposition. Additionally, and we've had several Eli Elezra hands on the show, and we've seen Elezra make some pretty liberal calls pre-flop, and frankly, some downright terrible calls. So if I have Ace-Queen on the button in this exact lineup, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm looking to go for a 3-bet for value. Additionally, you knock the blinds out, which especially in loose games, has a lot of value. So I'd like to see a 3-bet, but he does decide to go ahead and call. Now it's Negreanu in the small blind with 10-7 suited, and he has a pretty clear fold. Under the gun's open, couple players. Yeah, his odds are somewhat attractive, but he's going to have to go first post-flop, and position does matter a lot in no limit hold'em, particularly at deeper stacks. If he chooses to play this hand, I would sort of like to see a 3-bet as well, kind of similar to Elezra, but he decides to go ahead and go for the call, which is certainly a losing play. Now to the big blind, and Gus Hansen makes probably the most liberal decision of anyone in the hand, and decides to take a flop with 6-3 off. Now, I will say this about Gus Hansen's call here. When you're in the big blind closing the action, because your price is the best of any player before you, and there's no percentage chance you're going to get squeezed, you can be looser in this spot than any of the other spots. However, 6-3 off is probably just too loose. Now, I will say in multi-way pots it gets better, but facing this large of an open, I think you have to let this go. So, something along the lines of 4 of the 5 people shouldn't even be in this hand. Let's take a flop.
Sometimes getting priced in can work. Gus has flopped bottom 2 pair, and Daniel has top pair. Daniel checked, and Gus checks. Nobody else has anything, and they check.
The flop comes 10-6-3 rainbow, nailing Gus Hansen 6-3 off and giving Daniel Negreanu top pair. But other than that, all of the players have bricked, and because those 2 players are in the blinds, they're both going to check. Now the action's on Tom Dwan, and he has the option to c-bet into a field of 5 players, which he decides to not take. And I like this decision. You want to be careful with over-continuation betting into large fields. Elezra checks back on the flop here as well because he has nothing going on. And now the action's on Hoivold with ace-queen. Now, Hoivold could bet and try and thin the field out, especially because he knows it's unlikely Tom Dwan or Eli Elezra has anything strong. But with his ace high, I think the better play is to check and play some turns, which he does. Let's see the turn.
Well, there's an all-purpose queen for you. Both Andreas and Tom Dwan now have queens, and Ellie's got a flush draw. Everybody's got something. And the man with the best hand, 2-pair, bets 11-1. Possible here he might get 3 callers. I don't think Daniel's going to call when it gets to him with his 10s. Dwan calls. Ellie looks like he's calling with his flush draw. But he thinks better of it. Thinks somebody might have a higher flush draw. And Andreas makes his move. Thinks he might have the best hand and wants to end it right here.
I'm not folding.
You actually could. I try sometimes this kind of move. Commit myself with nothing.
Gus puts on his Popeye face. What's going on here? I never seen anything like this in my life. Guy comes over here from Norway, another Scandinavian.
I'm all in.
Gus goes all in.
The turn comes the Queen of Hearts, and now every single player at the table has some kind of piece that they're working with. Eli Elezra turns a flush draw, Tom Dwan turns a very shitty top pair, and Hoivold turns top pair, top kicker. So pretty much everyone has at least a decent reason to put some money into the pot. Negreanu checks with his second pair, which makes sense. If he bets, he only gets action from better. And now Gus Hansen takes the lead by betting about 11,000 with his bottom 2. Hansen's definitely going to want to bet here because of all of the players in this hand. He's the most likely to have hands like 2-pair. Hands like Queen 10 off, Queen 6 off, Queen 3 off, 10 6 off, 6 3 off, and then of course all of the sets. All of these hands are definitely hands Gus Hansen can be calling with pre-flop, and he can balance it out with bluffing with some straight draws, flush draws, all of those types of hands. And there are a lot of them like 5-4 or 7-8 or Jack-9 or King-Jack. So Gus Hansen takes the lead here with the betting, and I like this play. It's also unlikely 2 pairs almost ever behind because you figure you're going to see a bet on the flop by Dwan or Elezra or Hoivold when they have hands that beat him. And additionally on the turn, you're probably going to see a bet from Negreanu if he has a hand like pocket 6s. So with 6-3, I'm feeling quite good in Gus Hansen's shoes. He bets, and now Tom Dwan has a decision to make with top pair bad kicker, and it's not so clear. You know, if this was a 2 or 3-way pot, you would have a clear call, and call is probably the better play compared to fold. But if you get action behind and you have Queen 4 here, you're not feeling very good about your hand. You're really hoping that Gus Hansen's bluffing with some kind of draw, and that everyone behind you doesn't have anything. But considering how many players there are, this is a tough spot all around, and one of the reasons why you don't want to be opening hands as bad as Queen 4 suited out of the gun. Anyway, he decides to call, which I believe is the correct play, and now Elezra has an interesting decision with a flush draw. He's getting almost direct odds here to call. If he calls, he will risk 11,000 to win a pot around 51,000, which are about his odds to hit his flush draw, but there's a big problem. If a player left to act decides to raise, he gets forced out of the pot. And there's another problem. If a player has a higher flush draw than him, he's totally screwed. So while his fold does look nitty, and I would say if he was completing the action, I wouldn't like it, with a couple players left to act behind, I kind of like his decision to let it go. Now to the button, Hoivold has ace-queen and has to make a decision. Should he raise, thinking that these players are full of it and he has the best hand, or should he call and look to play some rivers? Now, I'm kind of a big fan of just calling here because Gus Hansen can absolutely have you beat with a variety of 2 pairs or 3 of a kind. Negreanu could occasionally be trapping, and there is still some chance that Dwan trapped the flop and is now ahead of you here on the turn. So with ace-queen, while you're likely to be ahead, you are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. If you call, you can play some rivers, possibly bluff on a heart river with the ace of hearts in your hand, and, keep everyone kind of in front of you. I don't like a decision to raise here, which he decided to go for, raising to 50,000 on an 80,000 stack, essentially committing himself to the pot. I mean, he really could have just jammed, but for whatever reason, he decided to go 50K. Now over to Negreanu. With his second pair, he has a clear fold, which he does, and is back on Gus Hansen. Now, Gus can't be too thrilled with the way things have gone down here. It's unlikely his opponent has much of a draw. It's also certainly possible his opponent has a hand like Queen 10, then check the flop back 5 ways, or decide to trap the flop with a set. However, because Gus Hansen has 6-3, the chance of that is much lower. There's now only 2 6s left in the deck and 2 3s, so he can be much more confident with his bottom 2. Gus decides to go for the rejam, and under the gun folds. Dwan folds his Queen 4. Elezra's already out of the pot, and it's back to Hoivold, who has himself committed. We have ourselves a $200,000 all-in. Let's see who can take it down.
Gus goes all in,
I call.
and Andreas calls. Andreas is the one that's all in.
What do we got,
I
guys?
hope I'm ahead. If I'm not ahead, it's over.
I mean,
Queens up, you mean?
they allow us to deal twice or no?
Okay, you want to deal it twice?
Okay.
They're going to deal the last card twice.
Gus with a
Andreas
6-3
thinks
there.
he's got 8 outs.
Wow.
We know that 3 of those cards are dead.
10.
He's really only got 5 outs.
Twice, yes.
They're going to deal the river twice. Each will be good for half the pot.
It's always good to win the first one.
That is very
That's the best
true.
way to do it if you run it twice, for
I was
sure.
figured Queen 10 was very unlikely.
Yeah, me too.
Because, I mean, why would he check a 10?
That 9 does not help Andreas. Gus wins the first
The
one.
second one is okay as well.
Queen 6 is like...
Andreas got one more chance. Catch a 10, a queen, or an ace.
Huh? That was good.
Winning no
Not
one is
there.
good at all. Oh, he's covering.
Yeah, I got it.
Gus Hansen takes down a major pot.
Remember, guys, when it comes to pre-flop play, tight is right. Thank you for joining me here today for Poker Hands, and I also have some unfortunate news. We're going to be canceling the show Table Talk due to a combination of being very busy and poor ratings. I want to thank everyone that supported this show. It was fun while we did it, and I wanted it to go longer, but ultimately I had other obligations like producing this show that ended up being more important. So thanks again to everyone that was supportive of the show. I'm sorry we only did 3 episodes, but I will still be here tomorrow.